Alexander the Great is widely considered one of history's most successful military commanders. However, his approach to warfare was brutal and frequently ruthless. Here are some of Alexander the Great's unspeakable acts against his enemies. Number 1. The Siege of Tyre. One of Alexander the Great's most stunning and bloody military triumphs was the Siege of Tyre, a vital coastal city in the eastern Mediterranean. From January to July in 332 BC, Alexander's operation demonstrated his creative strategies, unwavering determination, and merciless will. Situated on a tiny island approximately half a mile offshore was the ancient Phoenician city-state known as Tyre. It was almost impenetrable because of its powerful defensive walls that extended straight into the sea. A traditional siege would also be futile against the Tyrians because of their powerful navy, which could both harass potential attackers and provide food and supplies to the city. Following his victory at Issus, Alexander traveled to Tyre and demanded the city's surrender. The Tyrians disobeyed him because they felt secure in their island stronghold and assured of the defense that their walls and fleet provided. Alexander made the decision to besiege the city because he didn't want to enter Egypt with a formidable foe trailing him. Alexander tried an ambitious plan rather than a conventional siege. Using the debris from the old city of Tyre, which lay abandoned on the coast, he would construct a causeway, or mole, connecting the island to the mainland. This was a huge undertaking that needed the labor of thousands of men and the transportation of enormous quantities of wood and stone. The Tyrians launched counterattacks from the sea and on land as the mole got closer to completion. They harassed laborers with their ships, and they set fire to the siege engines with a big ship loaded with flammable materials. But Alexander was unwavering in his resolve, guarding his work with 2 rawhide-covered towers to keep them from catching fire. Alexander finally succeeded in obtaining ships from his new allies, the cities he had previously taken over, after multiple failed attempts. He used these to effectively cut off Tyre's supplies by blocking their ports. In addition, he carried artillery and siege towers, which he used to bombard the city walls. After 7 exhausting months, Alexander finally launched a 2-pronged attack in July 332 BC. Alexander's navy broke through the city's walls on the other side, while the Tyrians were preoccupied with an attack on the city's southern section. His army overran the Tyrian defense and poured into the city. Even by his standards, Alexander's treatment of Tyre in the aftermath of the siege was extraordinarily severe. An estimated 8,000 Tyrians are thought to have been killed, and the remaining 30,000 were sold into slavery. Alexander intended for his ruthless deeds to be a warning to other cities that might defy his authority. Alexander achieved a noteworthy victory during the Siege of Tyre. It demonstrated not only his military prowess and tenacity, but also solidified his hold on the eastern Mediterranean, providing him with a useful naval base and eliminating a major roadblock en route to Egypt. His reputation for being unbeatable, frightening possible enemies, and motivating allies was further strengthened by the successful siege. Alexander's tactical genius, unwavering perseverance, and merciless treatment of anyone who dared to oppose him are all on display during the Siege of Tyre. It is a terrifying illustration of his ferocity and a potent monument to his abilities as a military leader. It's one of the numerous explanations for why Alexander is still regarded as one of the most revered and feared people in history, even after more than 2,000 years. Number 2. The sacking of Persepolis. An important turning point in the history of ancient warfare was Alexander the Great's sacrificial destruction of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, in 330 BCE. It stood for the collapse of the Achaemenid Persian Empire and the establishment of Alexander's Macedonian dominion. Macedonian King Alexander had set out on a grand mission to conquer the known world. Alexander's army entered Persepolis, the center of Persian power, an opulent city renowned for its magnificent palaces and priceless artifacts, following multiple crushing victories over the Persian king Darius III. Alexander achieved a major strategic and symbolic victory with the conquest of Persepolis. With his successful conquest of the Persian Empire, he had put an end to the Persian resistance and ushered in a new period of Macedonian rule. The city stood for the height of Persian affluence and culture, and Alexander's conquest of it represented his unchallenged rule over the lands he had taken. A city of immense architectural beauty, Persepolis was home to numerous palaces, audience halls, and treasuries. Its opulence and wealth astounded Alexander's army. They stayed in the city for several months after arriving, enjoying the opulence and prosperity of the defeated Persians. They seized control of the enormous amounts of gold, silver, priceless jewels, and artwork that were kept in the city. Still, this was no quiet occupation. It is commonly known that Alexander permitted his soldiers to pillage the city, possibly as a consolation for their arduous efforts throughout the protracted expedition. Furthermore, it's possible that this was a calculated move meant to erode the perception of Persian invincibility and undercut any possible comeback. Thus, the common soldiers had a unique chance to significantly enrich themselves. Alexander's decision to set fire to Persepolis' magnificent palace gave the sacking of the city a darker tone. The choice was made at the urging of a courtesan named Thais during an inebriated feast, according to ancient historians. Athenian Hetera Thais, who accompanied the Macedonian army, is said to have proposed burning the palace as retaliation against the Greeks for the Persian destruction of Athens approximately 150 years prior during the Greco-Persian Wars. In a fit of irrational enthusiasm, Alexander accepted the proposal while intoxicated, and the palace caught fire. The magnificent buildings of the city were destroyed by the fire as it quickly spread. According to some reports, Alexander realized his mistake the next day, but it was too late to prevent the city from being destroyed by fire. Persepolis' burning is still a contentious incident. Some see it as a justifiable act of cultural vandalism and wanton destruction, while others see it as retaliation for Persian excesses during the Greco-Persian Wars. Nevertheless, Alexander's campaign was defined by the siege and burning of Persepolis. It strengthened Alexander's hold over the lands he had just conquered and delivered a strong message about the repercussions of opposing Macedonian authority. It also functioned as a moving representation of the collapse of the Persian Empire and the beginning of the Hellenistic era. Persepolis has remained symbolic even after it was destroyed, a stark reminder of the imperial hubris's futility, and the inevitable passage of time and power was provided by the smoldering ruins of the once magnificent city. An era came to an end, and a new one began with the sacking of Persepolis. It was a striking illustration of the significant power shifts that molded the ancient world, and a monument to the strength and brutality of Alexander the Great and his army. The remains of Persepolis serve as a sobering reminder of both the terrible forces that brought about its fall and its past grandeur, even in the face of succeeding centuries and the rise and fall of other empires. Number 3. The punishment of Bessus. Bessus was a nobleman who came from the Bactria region, which is now part of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. He was involved in one of the most dramatic events of Alexander the Great's conquest of Asia. Alexander's 329 BCE punishment of him tells a sobering story of power, treachery, and retaliation. After the Persian king Darius III was vanquished at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Bessus and other satraps, provincial governors, hatched a scheme to overthrow their monarch. Bessus and his accomplices captured the vanquished King Darius III during his retreat from the battlefield with the intention of using him as a negotiating chip with Alexander. But when Alexander's army drew near, Bessus made the bold decision to assassinate Darius III and proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, king of Persia. When Alexander saw Darius's lifeless body, he swore he would exact revenge on the Persian king's killers and bring them to account. In the meantime, Bessus, the new king, withdrew to Bactria in order to gather his army and thwart Alexander's march east. But Bessus's claim to the throne failed to receive the backing he had hoped for. While some Persian nobility questioned Bessus's capacity to withstand Alexander's onslaught, many were uneasy about his regicide. After seizing control of a large portion of Persia in 329 BCE, Alexander turned his forces towards Bactria. The discontent and suspicion among Bessus's allies grew as he moved forward. Two of Bessus's fellow conspirators, Nabarzanes and Barcentes, realized that fighting Alexander would be ineffective and that surrendering would result in rewards. As a result, they captured Bessus and gave him over to Alexander's army. When Bessus was captured, it was over. Alexander made the decision to publicly and severely punish Bessus in an effort to highlight his status as Darius's vengeful successor and the rightful heir to the Persian throne. After being whipped for the first time, he was taken to Ecbatana and put on trial for treason and regicide. Alexander arranged for Bessus to be executed in a Persian manner, befitting his crimes, by having him disfigured. His ears and nose were severed. a punishment customarily meted out to Persians for transgressions against the monarch. It's likely that the purpose of this horrific deed was to warn off any potential rebels in his recently taken territory. After the mutilation was finished, Bessus was bound to 2 bent trees and ripped to pieces when the trees were released. This terrible demise, which was more typical in Macedonia, represented Alexander's ultimate claim to dominion over the man who had the audacity to claim the throne of Persia. Bessus's punishment effectively furthered Alexander's political objectives. It demonstrated his respect for Persian customs and his determination to uphold their laws, while also emphasizing his authority and the gravity with which he treated acts of treason and regicide. His methods were unquestionably brutal, but they also helped to solidify his vast empire. Number 4. The killing of Clitus the Black. The tragic incident in which Alexander the Great kills Clitus the Black captures the unrest and tensions that typified the last years of Alexander's rule. Since the earliest days of the Macedonian king's campaigns, Clitus, a seasoned officer and close friend, had proven to be an invaluable asset in Alexander's army. But in 328 BC, a heated argument at a banquet turned deadly, underscoring the strain of Alexander's growingly authoritarian rule. At the Battle of Granicus in 334 BC, Clitus the Black made a name for himself by severing the arm of a Persian noble who was about to deliver a fatal blow to Alexander, thus sparing his life. He advanced through the ranks over time by exhibiting bravery and loyalty. The unfortunate incident happened at one of Alexander's many feasts for his officers in Mariconda, today's Samarkand. These events, which were marked by binge drinking, were times for celebration and friendship, but they also served as forums for contentious arguments and arguments. At this specific feast, a disagreement broke out. Enjoying the success of his conquest in the East, Alexander started disparaging his father, Philip II's accomplishments, and equating himself with the mythological Greek heroes. Clitus, a devout traditionalist who had worked for Philip and respected him, found this upsetting. Alexander was chastised by Clitus, who also praised Philip's accomplishments and rejected Alexander's supposed divinity. He also took issue with Alexander's adoption of Persian traditions, such as proskynesis, a ceremonial bowing that was regarded as a sign of subservience in Greek culture, but a custom of respect in Persia. Alexander's friends initially restrained him, furious at the confrontation. But finally, the extremely drunk king reached for a spear and pushed Clitus through, instantly killing him. The murder of a close friend and army officer sent shockwaves through Alexander's court. It was a startling illustration of the strain Alexander's actions and mannerisms were causing among his soldiers and a clear indication of the king's failing judgment and self-control. Alexander tried to kill himself by jumping onto the same spear out of regret, but his guards intervened. After the incident, he locked himself away for 3 days without food or water, sinking into a deep depression. Alexander the Great's character and reign reveal a darker side with the assassination of Clitus. A close friend and devoted soldier was killed in an impulsive act of violence caused by his intoxication, short fuse, and haughty demeanor. It also represents the growing dissonance between Alexander's conceited view of himself and his men's unease with his assimilation of foreign traditions. Even though he regrets it, Alexander's legacy will always be marred by this incident. It depicts a critical juncture in his reign when his unmatched achievements and assimilation into a new cultural identity started to drive him away from his allies and fuel an internal downfall that ultimately hastened his premature demise. Alexander the Great's choices and actions are still a source of ongoing interest and controversy today. His bold vision, ambition, and military prowess changed the course of history in ways that are still felt today. However, his more negative traits, such as his erratic behavior, conceit, and sporadic cruelty, cast a long shadow over his legacy. His unwavering pursuit of glory, embodied in his ceaseless conquest campaign, was matched by a propensity to act violently and impulsively when his authority was questioned. Alexander's character can be seen in its extremes in the stories of Bessus' cruel punishment, the vicious sacking of Persepolis, the heroic siege of Tyre, and the tragic death of Clitus the Black. These were moments that demonstrated not only his unwavering resolve and strategic acumen, but also his ability to be merciless and, on occasion, exhibit unrestrained aggression. We learn more about this legendary persona as a result of everything. In addition to being a brilliant military strategist and inspirational leader, Alexander the Great was also a complicated, profoundly flawed person. His actions and life still captivate us, teaching us important lessons about the human cost of unbridled ambition, the complexities of leadership, and the paradoxes of power. As we come to the end of this examination of Alexander's life, we are once more reminded that the most significant historical figures are frequently just as controversial as they are influential. Their lives act as a reflection of the times we live in, forcing us to consider the nature of authority, moral responsibility, and leadership from a critical perspective. We appreciate you coming along on this historical tour. Watch this space for more perceptive analyses of the most fascinating historical narratives.